Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to our Geneva Urban Debate series event. We are very happy to have speakers from different backgrounds to brief you on two important events that happened here in Geneva last week. I will moderate the panel. My name is András Szörényi from the Global Cities Hub. And the reason why we decided to organize this briefing is mainly that these two events were both possible to follow online, but a lot of you, dear audience, could not interact during the events. And we decided to organize this briefing to give you as much information about the outcomes, about the highlights of these events as possible. We will have two kick-off speakers today. Ms. Kamileva, co-director of the Global Cities Hub, Mr. Graham Alabaster, the Chief of UN Habitat Geneva office. And after their opening, I will invite three speakers to share their experiences on these two events. Boris Richard from the mission of Switzerland to the United Nations, also in his capacity as chair of the UNECE Executive Committee. Boris Le Montagnier, who is an organizer of the Building Bridges and our deal partner during the whole event. And from the UNECE side, Thomas Hartley, who will join us online to brief you on these events. So without further ado, let me give the floor to you, Camille.
Thank you very much, András. I will not take from the time of the speakers of the substance, just welcome everyone of this traditional Geneva urban debate, which we initiated with UN Habitat some years ago. They have different purpose. One is informative purpose. Other purpose is engaging with the very rich Geneva ecosystem of interstate meetings, expert meetings, and also meetings of international organizations, as well as private international initiatives. We have obviously the World Economic Forum sitting in Geneva, and last but not least, the newborn Building Bridges initiative, which is also based in Geneva, aiming at connecting finance people to the UN International World and thus of this year of mayors. So organizing Geneva urban debates together with UN Habitat again is our purpose to engage more with you. So I would encourage you to listen, but also to ask questions through our chat, questions which are of an informative nature, but also provocative. Why FoRUM is important, why Building Bridges initiative is important for you, to you, and what would you like to see, to understand, and eventually to come, why not to come and join us next year for these two initiatives. As both of them are recurrent, Forum of Mayors is every year, and Building Bridges also every year, the next edition being in December. So with no further ado, give you also the possibility to Graham as partner from the inception of this Geneva urban debate. So Graham, what would you add to this?
Thanks very much, Camelia. Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here on behalf of Habitat. The history of the urban debate goes back quite some time because it was one of the first activities that the Global Cities Hub and Habitat started together here in Geneva. And this event has grown in stature and in interest. And it really provides a very sort of neutral platform to discuss a variety of things, as Camelia has already said. But it's really showing that how the ecosystem in Geneva is contributing to the debate on inclusive multilateralism. And of course, the two events that we talked about clearly demonstrated this, and they're key to Habitat's policy and strategic plan. So this particular event today is special, of course, because the Forum of Mayors and the Building Bridges initiatives are relatively new ideas, but they're gaining ground very fast, and they're becoming the space to be seen for debate to take place. And also, I think the world outside is watching very closely what's happening in the Forum of Mayors, because this is a new, vibrant group that brings a new dynamism to the engagement of the cities in multilateral processes. So we fully support these events. The Building Bridges is also a fascinating example of this link between the development community and the financing community here in this special place in Geneva, in Switzerland. So without further ado, we're always happy to be part of this, and we look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much for this brief introduction, and then let's go and start our presentations. I encourage, as Director Camileva already said, to write your questions, comments in the chat, and I also encourage Amelia and Graham to join the discussion afterwards. As I mentioned, Ambassador Richard will be the first one presenting the view of Switzerland and perhaps your own experience at the Forum of Mayors.
Thank you, Andras. Thank you, Camelia, for the invitation. It's a great opportunity. Well, I was requested to answer to the question, why does Switzerland support the Forum of Mayors and why do we like it? So I will try to be short because the first meeting of the afternoon at 2 o'clock is always a challenging one, especially for those who are listening. But I would like to say three things, basically. We support the Forum of Mayors because we care, and we care for three things, basically. We care for cities, we care for multilateralism, and we care for Geneva. So let me quickly develop all those 3 points. Cities, you are not the ones to be convinced of the importance of cities, but let me just remind everybody in a nutshell that nowadays half of the world population is living in cities, and 3/4 of world's population will be living in cities by 2050. This is huge. In developing countries, 90% of GDP growth comes from cities in developing countries. And I should also add that cities worldwide are responsible for 70% of gas emissions. So it shows you how cities are important. And we do, as Switzerland, the Swiss government, more and more recognize and acknowledges the role of cities in world affairs, to put it short, to make it short. Cities themselves recognize and are engaged in managing world affairs, if I may say so. City diplomacy made by the cities, is gaining in importance. There are literally hundreds of associations of cities. I read there is also a parliament of cities. Those are very interesting and encouraging developments, and this is fully recognized by Swiss diplomacy. Some countries are also developing inside their administration, inside their diplomacies, dedicated teams for dealing with this emerging aspect of city diplomacies. And I think this is very welcome, because faced with huge challenges nowadays, we are all faced with multiple crises and huge challenges, and we have to be able to count on all possible actors to cope and to deal with those challenges. I don't know whether it's useful to make the whole list of them, and I would be afraid to forget one, but think of virtually everything: climate change, migration, security, you name it. Cities have a role to play. That is why for a couple of years now, we are paying a close attention to your habitats. We are trying to support them. Our development cooperation, I'm talking about the Swiss development cooperation, is increasingly working with cities. 3 years ago, Switzerland decided to help creating the Global Cities Hub, which you are the host of. And we continue to support this structure and to finance it in order to try to ease, how shall I put it, Camelia?
To try to influence entry points for city in the system.
Exactly. Entry points for cities in multilateral. So that's for cities. We acknowledge the role of cities in world affairs. Second, we also care for multilateralism. This is not new. We are co-founders since the very beginning of the multilateral system, which is to a large extent based in Geneva. And our assumption is that multilateralism is more needed than ever nowadays. It is no secret that the multilateral system is going through some challenging times due to a whole range of reasons. It's under stress. And that is even more a reason for us to care for it, to defend it, and to reform it and adapt it to new realities. And when we're talking about reforming the multilateral system, I don't want to evoke here the reform of the Security Council. That's a special case. But what we already can do is try to have a more inclusive multilateral system. And inclusive means that all stakeholders which have something to contribute to the resolution of crisis should at least have a say in the system. And I think of many potential actors, to begin with the so-called civil society, NGOs. The private sector has a huge role to play. Building bridges is a good example of that. The youth, the academics, and obviously local governments. Traditionally, until now, the multilateral system is very much is completely conceived and managed by states. Academics would talk of a Westphalian system, but we find it is more important than ever to include other stakeholders because it will make the system more efficient. It will bring the decisions the system takes. It will bring those decisions closer to the population, especially when you involve cities into the decision making process. And cities really have a role to play in almost all aspects. Take, for example, one of the big achievements of the multilateral system of the world community in the last week. It's the so-called Agenda 2030. You know, the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, which we are all trying to implement. One of those SDGs, I think it's SDG 11, is directly dedicated to cities. But you can take them one by one, and you will very quickly see that cities have a role to play, have something to contribute to the realization of virtually all SDGs. And that is why typically in this aspect of the discussion, cities need to have a say. And that is what we tried to achieve by supporting this Forum of Mayors, which technically, you have to understand, technically, institutionally, the Forum of Mayors is a group of experts of the UNECE, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which is one of the 5 regional economic commissions of the United Nations. It may sound technical, but it's just to stress that it is located there institutionally, because the UNECE is, we found, was the ideal place to create such a body, because it is so structured that it has room for groups of experts. There are more than 200 of them in the UNECE. But what you need to remember is that the Forum of Mayors is technically and officially a UN organ. It means that we are inside the UN when we talk at the forum of mayors. The recommendations, the worries, the points, the opinions of cities expressed at the forum of mayors are then channeled through the whole UN machinery, which goes up to ECOSOC and General Assembly. So that's new. That's fairly historical. That's bold from member states, and we are certain that it will contribute not just to bringing the voice of cities inside the UN system, but also to contribute concretely to the dialogue between cities, obviously, and between cities and member states, cities and other international organizations. So it is still relatively new. It was the third edition, third edition, but the first one under this new institutional setup, which for us diplomats means something, even if discussions are the same, but it means something. And this brings me, and that's the, I mentioned earlier that there were hundreds of associations of cities. It's true, and it's important. Cities are developing their diplomatic skills and capacities. But to my knowledge, the Forum of Mayors in Geneva is the only one which is inside the UN system, right? That's what I would like you to remember. And that brings me to my third point. I told you we care for cities, we care for multilateralism, and we care for Geneva. Obviously, we are here sitting in Geneva. Geneva was at the origin of the multilateral system, and we find it's the ideal place to hold and to host such a forum. Not just because it's Geneva and we want everything to be in Geneva, but because you have such an environment in Geneva that you can talk on virtually all topics of global interest for cities. You have international organizations dealing with health, with habitat, with migration, with trade, with labor, with and with intellectual property, with disarmament, although it's maybe less of an issue for cities. But you have all that, and on top of international organization, you have a whole in Geneva, you have a whole population of experts, of NGOs, of people caring, thinking about all that, and that is therefore the ideal place for creating synergies in favor of the Forum of Mayors. And that is also one reason why we are supporting we. When I say we, I mean the Swiss government is supporting the Forum of Mayors. So we had I don't want to be too long, but we had the third issue of the Forum of Mayors last week. I hope that several of you had the opportunity not just to come to Geneva, but to follow discussions online. We are now in the process of evaluating this edition of the Forum. I think, for what I first heard, the assessment was very positive, both from mayors and from member states and from other international organizations. But we are absolutely determined to always improve. It is already decided that we will have a new edition of the Forum of Mayors next year. I cannot tell you the date yet, and we will do not just as good as this year, but we will do even better. And I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible to the next edition of the Forum. And I will conclude here. Long live the Forum of Mayors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this overview. And I would like just to echo that the Westphalian states created this new UN organ, which is a great step. And we believe that the Forum of Mayors is really a very special place for local and regional governments to echo their voice, which goes up to the General Assembly, as Ambassador Richard mentioned. So now I have the pleasure to turn to our colleague at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, Thomas Hartley, with whom we worked extensively, being a partner of UNECE for the Forum of Mayors and especially its interregional segment. Tom, could you share your assessment of this third forum? What were the highlights in your view? What are the main topics discussed and how you see the future? The floor is yours.
Of course, and I trust that everyone can hear me, and if not, someone do bring that to my attention. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today from rainy London, even if only because my dear colleagues are ill, and I'm sure you will join me in wishing them a swift recovery, both to the director of the Housing and Land Management Division, Paula Deda, and also the secretary of the Forum of Mayors, Mia Alibegovic. It is probably not an exaggeration to say that doing the Forum of Mayors has really taken its toll on the team, if only just to suggest how much work it was for us. But I'm Thomas, I'm a consultant with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe's Housing and Land Management Unit. And I'm grateful to Ambassador Richard for explaining what the Economic Commission for Europe is so that I don't have to. But more simply, I was involved in organizing the Forum of Mayors, and I'd like to thank the Global Cities Hub both for hosting this event and the invitation to speak, but also, as Andras alluded to, the really useful and vital support in helping organize the Forum of Mayors, in particular the interregional segment, which has garnered a lot of praise from people that we have spoken to. So thank you very much for that. In my remarks, I guess I'll try to provide a brief explanation of what the Forum of Mayors is and kind of how it came to be, as well as our vision for the future, whilst endeavoring not to repeat things that have been said so far. And so please bear with me if you see me reading and having to skip things. But before I go into the substance, I'm kind of inclined to reflect briefly on the importance and I guess the interesting nature of cities as a form of political, spatial, and social organization. It's likely that all of you are aware, and I've heard this statistic like 20 times in the last week, but over 50% of the world's population live in cities, and by 2050, this is estimated to be over 2/3. It's also likely that many of you have lived in different cities and towns throughout your lives and noticed the kind of myriad different ways in which urban environments differ. And I think understanding how cities are determined by their natural environments, their histories, and their economies is a really important first step in recognizing their potential as drivers of increased democracy and civic engagement, and as well as, I guess, more broadly, truly sustainable and inclusive development. And I think listening to Boris's comments on Geneva reveals this so clearly, how this city has a clear identity and clear strength. And it's a real kind of point of something that we think is a strength of the Forum of Mayors, that we attempt to get cities and towns to reflect on their unique diversity and then share with others how they confront these common challenges that we're facing in this period of the poly crisis or multiple crisis, as we like to define it. And I think we're also aware that cities are on the front lines of humanity's most pressing challenges, whether or not that's pandemics or the climate crisis or natural hazards. And we're aware, at least to an extent, that these challenges can't be addressed by national governments alone. Cities have become key partners to tackle these challenges and support efforts to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's certainly clear that multi-level governance and multi-stakeholder coordination are key to achieve the SDGs. And for that, we need to redistribute resources both vertically and horizontally to recover better and become more resilient. And this, I guess, brings us to the Forum of Mayors. And at the UNECE, we are, and have been since 2019, committed to giving cities a voice. And that's why we have established the Forum of Mayors, which is now, as Boris says, a subsidiary body of the UNECE Committee on Urban Development, Housing, and Land Management. And I think the history of this committee is somewhat interesting. It's existed since 1947, and its original purpose was to help standardize housing regulation for the post-war reconstruction of Europe. So it's a committee that's born out of the crisis of the Second World War, and now we have the Forum of Mayors perhaps being born out of the poly crisis that we face now. The committee also deals with the localization of SDGs through regional guidelines for the development of VLRs, as well as other tools like sustainable city profiles. And so on the 8th of April 2019, UNECE organized the Day of Cities, and this was followed by the first FoM of Mayors in October of 2020. And this, I guess, is what we've said here, opened the multilateral stage to city leaders for the first time, perhaps. And the second FoM of Mayors took place in 2022, back-to-back with the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. And then in 2023, the forum was officially established as the subsidiary body. And this last step, as Boris says, has really internalized the process within the UN system and made it possible for cities to be formally included into ETE's intergovernmental processes. And so this forum took place last week under the theme Urban Regeneration Towards 2030. And we had over 60 mayors from around the world here in Geneva, with about 300 participants from cities and country delegations from across the EC region and beyond. And we also had a number of partners and colleagues from the regional UN system, as well as NGOs, academia, and representatives of youth. Of the 60 city representatives present, about 41 city leaders shared their experiences through a series of roundtable discussions organized around 4 distinct thematic segments. The first was the Interregional Segment, which included the participation of mayors from other regions. And again, I reiterate our gratitude towards the Global Cities Hub for their support and facilitation of this segment. The second segment focused on projects for urban regeneration, asking mayors and city leaders what projects they had undertaken in specific regards to urban regeneration. The third segment focused on regeneration towards resilience, be that physical or community resilience. And then the fourth and final segment addressed the localization of the SDGs. I think in spite of the great diversity of cities present, one thing that was reaffirmed and has been mentioned in the responses to our post-forum survey that's still live is that while cities exist in different areas in different regions and have completely different socioeconomic identities, the challenges they face are common. And these include combating climate change and the extreme weather events that brings, ensuring a smooth and inclusive energy transition, revitalizing deprived areas and cities, fighting air pollution, providing adequate housing. And a particularly interesting point that came out of one of our side events was the need to foster a more polite and inclusive political culture that encourages participation and engagement in order to reduce the democratic backsliding that is unfortunately perhaps taking place in our region. A key aspect of the forum then is sharing the innovative solutions that cities have created or are adopting to cope with the many challenges they're facing. And let me please enumerate a few here. Some talked about the creation of infrastructure to absorb excess water to avoid flooding, and canal projects, large infrastructure projects that they had undertaken to achieve this. Others spoke about the establishment of clean air zones and the strict regulation of the price of public transportation in order to encourage people to use greener modes of transport. We also heard about locally subsidized social housing and policies limiting the share of income that is necessary to be used to pay for low-income housing. And others spoke about the establishment of municipal assemblies to engage residents and ensure local participation in various city initiatives. We also had 4 interesting side events that focused on issues such as urban food systems, which was, I think, co-organized by the Global Cities Hub. There was an event on city diplomacy and peace. There was a voluntary local review and voluntary national review studio, again, I believe sponsored by the Global Cities Hub. And then we at ECE, in coordination with the Italian Permanent Mission to the United Nations in Geneva, organized a side event on women's underrepresentation in local governance and the importance of a gender perspective on urban planning. And then I think I'll end with this because I don't speak too long, but for the first time this year, at the end of the forum, we had recommendations on urban regeneration approved by the mayors. And these were, in fact, transmitted to the Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management. So just to explain what that means that cities and mayors are coming together and helping the Secretariat draft a document and then giving that document to member states to adopt. These cities, these mayors are asking national governments to listen to them in a formal way within a UN process. And specifically, countries were invited to support the commitment to regenerate deteriorating areas, infrastructure or facilities in cities with relevant financial and legal tools. Mayors also invited member states to support the establishment of city-to-city partnerships to coordinate and cooperate on urban regeneration projects. And I think finally, and perhaps the most important and interesting recommendation, was the recommendation that member states involve cities and facilitate their participation in relevant UN processes to foster this renewed and inclusive multilateralism. And we really think that the Forum of Mayors is a step towards exactly this, a new multilateralism where no one is left behind and fit for the trials and tribulations of the mid-21st century. And I think ultimately our vision for the future is a forum acting as a dynamic platform where mayors can come together to exchange ideas, learn from one another, and also engage with other stakeholders, be that youth, be that civil society, be that academia, but most importantly with member states as well, and establish new partnerships across various levels of governance, because this is what is vital to building a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive world. And I think that more than anything else, we want you and everyone who believes in this idea to be involved. So if you have questions or ideas, please drop us an email and check out our website. All the sessions of the Forum of Mayors are available on UNTV. And I think, yeah, let's work together to grow the Forum of Mayors as the necessary and new form of multilateralism that we desperately need for this current moment. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this overview and for reminding us of all the issues from peace, food security, gender equality, and sustainable housing infrastructure, which were very high on the agenda. And it's very interesting that the event, the Global Cities Hub, had the pleasure to organize at Building Bridges. Several speakers and members of the audience actually mentioned the question of sustainable housing and sustainable infrastructure, which requires sustainable financing. And I think it's a very clear sign that Geneva is really a place where the different participants of the global discussion and the different stakeholders interact with each other. Building Bridges was an event, a series of events where Global Cities Hub brought mayors from all around the world. But I would like to ask you, Boris, to elaborate on the whole program of Building Bridges, how sustainable financing came to the picture in Geneva, and what are your key takeaways of the outcomes of the forum.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you very much, Camelia, for having me here today. So I would start by saying that after all what I listen here, like cities are extremely important, local governments are extremely important, and our goals are in the end the same. Our goals are to address like the triple planetary crisis of like pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss, but also inequalities, poverty, hunger, and many other social issues. I think state multilateralism is obviously one. This extended multilateralism to cities and local government is another, and finance is again another lever to enable to address basically all these issues we have in the world that we want to find solutions for. So the goal of Building Bridges is to align finance with sustainability. That's not a small one. The goal is to address sustainability through finance in Switzerland and more broadly around the globe. And you mentioned, Boris, earlier that in fact the reason why the Global Forum of Mayors took place in Geneva is because of this unique ecosystem. And in fact, it is exactly the same reason for Building Bridges. Different ecosystems, I guess, but on one hand, like the UN, on one bank of the the river, and on the other side, the financial institutions on the other bank. The goal is like to build bridges between these two banks, and this is precisely the goal of building bridges. So it's very much a collaborative effort, leveraging the power of finance and Geneva unique ecosystem. It's slowly becoming, we hope even more so in the years to come, like an international hub for sustainable finance. To give you a little bit of background, it started in 2019. It was brought together by the national authorities, which is a very important, let's say, stakeholder of building bridges. So we've got like three basically poles. One are like the local and national authority, represented by the city, the canton, and the federation. The finance community, obviously, and then the United Nations, NGOs, and other international partners. So these are like really like the three parts of building bridges. The goal is really to connect members from the finance sector, from the government sector, and from the sustainable development sector. The mission is to accelerate the transition to a global economic model aligned with the needs of a sustainable and just society, as I was saying earlier. Again, it's a lever. I would not consider it as anything else. Also to provide, and I think there is also some overlap here with the FoM of Mayors, a forum for discussion, cooperation between the global South and the global North, where there are a lot of like differences, obviously. Different things to be addressed, but there are like also a lot of things to be done together. And finally, to shape I would say like the last maybe mission is like also of building bridges is to shape the global sustainable finance agenda. To give you a sense of like who participates in building bridges, because I think it's quite important who is there. Financial sector is, let's say, a third. NGO and civil society constituencies also represent more or less a third. And then we've got corporate companies, international communities, as in international organizations and UN, and government, obviously, as well. So these are like a little bit like the key communities. This year, it took place from October 2nd to 5th. It started with a summit with like very high level speakers, such as, and I'm gonna say a few names, but these are probably not all the most important names. Elizabeth Maruma-Mrema, who used to be the chair of COP15, who is now the co-chair of TNFD. I won't get into the details. Dr. Ngozi, like the director of WTO, and also some like key figure of like in the financial world, so Sergio Amotti, the CEO of UBS. So very different communities. This took place on the 2nd, on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. There's been like about 70 events, which we call the Action Days, in which one of these events was organized by Geneva Cities Hub, UN Habitat, in the context of the FoM of Mayors, and I will provide like a few key outcomes of this, which I have managed to find. To give you a sense a little bit of what are these like 70-ish events about, it's kind of like really put in like different, or I place them at least in like different baskets in order to kind of identify the key topics which we address through all these events. So there is one category which is in the financial world. It may seem a bit weird here, but like in the financial world, it is really very important to engage with these, let's say, group of people, the asset owners. The asset owners, we keep on hearing that they are the one that need to be more present, and it's right. They are the one that makes the ultimate decisions. So there is like, let's say, one part, like a few events that were dedicated to asset owners. And then the other categories, if I may, is like climate and energies, nature, social, innovative finance being probably the most relevant for what has to do with cities, simply because we need innovative finance mechanism and vehicles in order to channel money for like projects at the city level. We also had events around transparency and accountability, and maybe my favorite one is what we called systemic change. It touched upon the role of activism in like moving the needle for the financial system. It touched upon the place of finance in a post-growth world. So it went in like really all kind of like different direction, which is precisely the goal, to explore all these avenues and for one another to understand better what is the world of today finance, what is the world of tomorrow, and what can we do now in order to do better tomorrow. I will just say a few words also, if I have the time, yes, about the collaborations. So there is this event, the summit, the action days, and like some other like events that took place around. We also had some collaborations. One collaboration was with United Nations Climate Change, UNFCCC. It took place on October 3rd and 4th. And here again, I think it's an interesting point to like reinforce the role of finance in like moving the needle on all these environmental and social issues we face. So basically, COP27 that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh, the COP climate last year, figured that basically the Article 2.1c, which is one of the three objectives of the Paris Agreement, has never really been addressed. The first 2.1a is about mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The Article 2.1b is about adaptation. We all know what it means, in particular in the context of cities, nature-based solution. Adaptation is really important, and a lot can be addressed at the city level. And Article 2.1c, which has not really been addressed in 2015, in fact, is about aligning financial flows with an economy that is low carbon. And this has barely been addressed. So COP27 presidency requested UNFCCC to organize two dialogues called the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogues. One took place in Bangkok in July, and the second one took place within Building Bridges on the 3rd and 4th of October. This is very interesting because, as I was saying earlier, the way I see finance is just, I'm not a finance person by education or training, is one lever to move things, to make things happen or not. From this perspective, it's interesting to see how the Paris Agreement, the strongest multilateralism agreement worldwide on environment as of now, and climate in particular, sees it as one special objective. I just think it's interesting. And we had like two other collaborations. I won't get into more details, but with TNFD, which is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, that got basically the European launch was took place at Building Bridges. And the goal of this is very much to put nature on the agenda of finance. Another collaboration with Seedstars, which is a community that is basically supporting young entrepreneurs to grow their capacities around the world and to turn these young entrepreneurs and ideas into investable business, to channel money again where it's needed. As a quick outcome of this Building Bridges edition that took place last week, so it was over 100 events during 4 days, 150, 200 event organizers, over 2,500 participants, growth from like 40% from last year is really gaining momentum. And next edition is taking place from the 9th to the 12th of December 2024. And maybe I can take a few more minutes to present, or maybe you want to present a couple of like key outcomes from the events that took place. Yeah. So the event was called "How to Increase Financing for SDGs at the Local Level Through UN Action" to organize between UN Habitat and other UN organizations. The session really explored the nexus between sustainable development goals and local governance. And the key outcomes, and there are 4, need for coordinated financing strategies to avoid wastage of money, maximize local resources, before even like in a way seeking external investments. This was like one of the outcomes. On the other hand, addressing climate change and achieving the SDGs require significant investments, and cities and states alone won't do it. That's precisely the goal of innovative finance, to push money where it's needed through innovative mechanism. And to do this, we need to attract this private investment. We also need actionable frameworks and taxonomies in place, which basically I would call this like good regulation, which support this kind of endeavor. The collaboration between private investors and local governments is much needed. And in particular, as you said, Andres, earlier, when it comes to sustainable real estate, urban regeneration, infrastructure projects, and climate adaptation initiatives. Article 2.1b of the Paris Agreement. Last but not least, while cities hold, and I think this was a point that was made very clearly during the discussion, the physical discussion you had, while cities hold the destiny concerning SDGs financing, they must also focus on reducing risks, accessing various funding sources, and fostering PPP, public-private partnerships. I'll stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boris, for this absolutely perfect and comprehensive overview. I look at the clock and we have 15 minutes left, so I encourage the participants, our audience, to write your questions in the chat. And let me turn to our speakers with the first two questions that was addressed already, and I would like all of you to react, if possible, very shortly in 1 minute. The two question is, what is the biggest added value of mayors participating in your organization's work, in your program, on a daily basis? And the second question was about developed and developing countries and cities. Do you think that exchange of experience between developed and developing countries is more useful, or you think that exchanges between developed countries and the different exchange between developing countries is more useful? Please choose your weapon and answer the parts you feel more comfortable with. Let's start with you, Graham.
Thanks very much for both those questions. I mean, the question I get asked most often from local authorities and mayors is, how do we access money? How do we access finance? It's their biggest challenge. And this is where the difference between the developing world and the developed world comes in, because many developing countries, they don't have the capacity at the local level to either provide, prepare proposals and move them forward, and they're seen as a high-risk investment. So there's a lot of work needed, really, to build the capacity at local level, particularly amongst the developing world, for them to be fit to receive sub-sovereign investment, which is, they've shown that they can be nimble in many cases if they're given the tools to do this. And I've experienced over the years of many cities where they do develop that capacity, and they have, okay, they might have to be, their sub-sovereign lending might have to be overseen by, underwritten by the national government, but in some cases not. So there's a huge need, and that's where I think the Forum of Mayors and Building Bridges is very useful, because it helps the local level to understand how they can access finance and how they can speak to financiers and approach. And I mean, a lot of that, we've seen a springing up of these innovative funds around, well, climate, carbon, and all these things that we can support this local level thing. The other thing about in answer to your first question, is that mayors and city leaders are the ones who know their communities best. They're the missing middle. They're the ones who can unlock the potential of civil society, more so than the national government. So they play a critical role in optimising and maximising the investments that come in at city level. So I think for me that's the most important point. Was there anything else I wanted to mention? No, I think that's okay.
Thank you very much. Boris?
Yes, I'll start maybe with the second question, and I'll be short. The so-called opposition between cities in the developed world and in the developing countries. One thing that struck me when I attended the FoM of mayors last week, and as you know, there were mayors from the ECE region, from New York, from Europe, but there were also several mayors from developing countries, and they extensively exchanged on panels. And one thing that struck me is that basically they all face the same problems. Realities may be very different. Access to finance, fiscal policy might be very different, but as mayors, they do face the same problems. When the panel I had the privilege to chair was about resilience. How can a city be resilient? To be honest, to face flooding, housing, all those challenges are the same for virtually all mayors. I would make a bigger difference between very small and very big cities. Their realities and challenges might be somehow different. You have mega cities in the world, which are, you know, several dozen million people, and you have still very tiny cities. And in most of administrative systems of most countries, they would be somehow they would have the same competences, basically. So there, we might maybe refine a little bit our approach to better address real challenges. And I see there may be a difference between smaller and huge cities, but between cities of developed and developing countries, I see few. On the first question, what's the added value of cities? My understanding is that cities, in many instances, in most cases, are at the end of the chain. They are the implementing entities. They are it's the implementing level of national political decisions many times. Countries take decisions in terms of climate policy, for example, and at the end of the chain, the cities have to implement them. And that's the reason why it is important for us to encourage a little bit in the multilateral system, a little bit of a somehow bottom-up approach. It has been extensively top-down in many instances, and I think that this bottom-up approach needs to be encouraged. It's actually very much a Swiss way of doing things, bottom up. But there are many examples. Take infrastructure, for example. You talk about transport, education. At the end of the day, it needs to be implemented concretely in cities. It needs to be coherent. Cities need to set priorities. Because they cannot do everything at the same time. Now, issues as financing or rhythm or priorities for doing things, it is important for cities to have their say and say what they want, what they can do, what they cannot. That's how I see it. And that's the added value for the system itself, to hear what cities want. And it's interesting also for cities to hear from member states and from other cities which creative solutions they have found, how they cope with a different situation, and I could have many examples here, but I will stop. I will stop here.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to you, Tom. Any of the questions you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably going to hit hardest the implementation nature of mayors, and that's why they're so important, but Boris hit that nicely. I think for me, what I'd say is for certain mega cities, their populations outweigh that of nations. I mean, I'm in London today, it's a population of 8 million people. which makes it, you know, a massive political entity. And so it would be weird for them not to have representation, for them not to be involved in these big processes. I think when the people that they govern, you know, do outnumber those of some small nations. I think that the other point that I'd say is that the value of mayors is that cities are important islands of stability. When it comes to instability and crisis, when most people live in urban environments, having urban environments or having environments where lots of people live be stable is incredibly important. And for that reason, there's a big added value of including mayors in these international fora and supporting them and enabling them. And then finally, I think when it comes to trialing like ideas or trialing best policies or procedures that can improve SDG progress, cities are small bounded communities. You can try things. If it doesn't work, you can stop it and move on, and the impact isn't so great. And if you have lots of cities trialing different things, then you have a big iterative process that eventually you'll get solutions that you can then share with the wider community. And then on the second question, I mean, every city can learn from one another, regardless of whether or not it's from the developing world or it's from the developed world. You get innovative solutions from all over the world, and creating a platform for cities, both large and small, both rich and poor, to get together and interact, it just necessarily creates added value from my perspective. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom. Let me turn to you, Boris, from your perspective.
I try to be very short, as we've got like 3 minutes left, I believe. The place of like mayor and the added value of having mayors in forums, in like conferences such as building bridges is obvious. We are trying to bring a bunch of like very different actors together. There is money, there are cities that have needs, and we need to kind of like build these bridges. That's for like a very simple and short answer. On the place of developing countries versus developed countries and cities, I would just like use an example that was provided by James Mwangi, like the CEO of like Equity Group Holdings. Basically, let's not say there is no difference. There is a difference. And in fact, the difference is, for example, if in Kenya, which have never defaulted since independence, you want to start like a solar panel project, for example, of X million, you will have an interest rate that is of like 14%. You want to do exactly the same thing here in Switzerland, you have an interest rate of 2%. We keep on talking about like the debt. We keep on talking about like this massive issue that is a debt that is like putting, let's say, Africa, but like the developing world at large under huge pressure. And this is an example. So yes, we need to make a difference, and these differences must be addressed. I think our role of building bridges is not only to build trust in these emerging markets, but also to give a voice for all these people who are basically in these developing markets, either at the state level, in banks, or even more so maybe in cities. The rules of the game need to evolve. This is also why Dr. Ngozi, the director of WTO, was present. And yes, we need to make a difference, and we need to address these differences, I think.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Camelia.
Thank you so much. I will not repeat what other speakers said in the interest of time. I just wanted to pick up one thing on the building bridges, and basically what Boris said is that a bottom-up approach is needed. How this could be done in places where basically outside federal states, in other states, the central government actually is managing all the funding, or almost all the funding, for local and regional governments. One concrete outcome of the building bridges and forum of mayors was that one, how you dialogue with the central government if you are a city, in order to access to funding, in order to access to a place on the table when negotiated a PPP, so private-public partnership. And this is actually one very burning question, I think, because all the mayors, or almost all of our mayors who came to the building bridges, they had a concrete PPP project, and they had almost a portfolio in their in their pocket, seeking for funders. Some of the public of the event that you had ran behind us and said, "Oh, I want to talk to the mayor of Amman," or "I want to talk to the mayor of Kigali." And I thought in my head, now that's good. This is what we wanted. But how the central government of the mayor of Kigali, meaning Rwanda, and how the central government of Amman, meaning Jordan, will react on this. So to me, this is one of the next concrete steps, and we will be organizing an event in December to discuss how local and regional governments can actually get to funding and how they can get to participate in PPPs. So that's one of the problems that I'll be happy to tackle with you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions, for the answers. There was one question which was directed to us, Global Cities Hub, how to connect. You can reach out to us through our website, through our digital contacts. We are here to connect local and regional governments to the international organizations and the international community in Geneva, working on different projects from sustainable development, sustainable financing, urban health, or digitalization, just to mention a few. And we are open to work with all of you who are interested in multilateralism. Thank you very much for our speakers, Tom Hartley, Boris Le Montagnier, Boris Richard, Graham Alabaster. Thank you for your time and your presence.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.